Okay, hi fourth graders. This is Mr. Steinberg trying a different program here to see if I can help us understand how all decimal numbers are able to be written as a fraction or a mixed number. I know we just went through a couple of really tough units in math with dealing with fractions, comparing fractions, identifying improper fractions, and adding and subtracting, and then we moved on to the mixed numbers, and it's very difficult. Um, so if you have any questions about anything that we went through thus far, just ask. But I know many of us are still are in this unit dealing with decimals, and I was hoping maybe I could just show you using this new program why decimals and fractions are the same. And I'm going to start with the decimals. So I'm going to try to give you a few examples to kind of show you that there are certain clues that help you prove that decimal numbers are indeed fractions. The first thing we have to look at here, you notice that this is a place value chart. To the left over here, right, all of these place values over here are the ones that we're familiar with, right? These are the whole numbers. These are the ones that we enjoy working with. But remember, just like we learned with fractions, there are numbers that are in between whole numbers. So you can have numbers that represent fractional parts or decimals between 0 and 1, or between 1 and 2, or anywhere from 10 to 11, or 10 to 20, or 10 to 100, and it just goes on forever. So let's take a look at the first example. Let's say we don't have any ones, right? Let's say we go back to our place value. We don't have any whole units, right? We have 0 of those. But let's say we have 4/10. Now notice I like to say the name of the place value. And whenever I look at the dot or the period, I like to say the word and. So when I read it, I'm going to say 0 and 4/10. That's kind of the way that helped me understand just by talking about it, or saying it out loud. I say, well, this is 0 and 4/10. Just putting it in words. So I hope that helps. So then what that tells me is really I don't have any units. I don't have any whole units. I don't have any ones. So all I have are 4/10. Well, now that I said that, the key word that comes out to me or that appears to me, is the word tenths. And you notice tenths ends in THS. There are some other words that we're familiar with now that end in THS, right? There are fourths, there's sixths, eighths, and ninths, and those, hopefully we remember that those represented fractions. If you have 1 out of 4, you have fourths. If you have 1 out of 6, you have sixths, or eighths, you have 1 out of 8. And ninths, we have like 1 over 9. That represents ninths, right? One out of 9, or 1/9, which is a unit fraction. And again, there's the word unit, so we have ninths. Well, tenths also ends in THS. So I don't have any units, remember? I have 0, but I have 4/10. So what does that look like? Well, I have 4, and because tenths represents like a fraction, we have 4/10. So we have 4/10, 4 out of 10, right? Or 4 over 10, or 4 divided by 10. But our denominator is 10, our numerator is 4, so we have 4/10. So think about where we started, right? We started with 0 and 4/10. Well, you could go the other way, right? 4/10, 4 over 10 is equal to 0 and 4/10, or you can say 0 and 4/10 is equal to 4/10. So I hope that's starting to kind of become clear if it was not clear before. Let's move on to another example, but this time we'll add a 1, right? We'll add something in the ones column. Actually, no, I won't, not yet. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I left out here. Nope. Let's take a look at the next one. Let's move on to a different place value. Let's stay with the idea that we have 0 units or 0 ones, but let's say we have 72 hundredths. Okay, so I have, how am I going to read this number? I'm going to start with the 0. I'm going to say I have 0, and remember wherever you see the decimal point, say the word and, 0 and 72 hundredths. I hope you're starting to see kind of a pattern. So just really quick, so now we know that we're dealing with this place value, hundredths. So when we read it, what you do is you read the whole numbers first, which in our case has 0, so I say 0. Decimal point means and, so I have 0 and then you just read the number. Just read the number as written, 72. That's it, 72. So I have 0 and 72, and then there's hundredths. Well, hundredths to me represents, right? Hundredths would be 1 out of 100. That's 100th. So we say that's 100th. That's like 1 out of 100. But in our example here, we have 72 hundredths. So that means we have 72 out of 100. And that's the same thing as 0 and 72 hundredths. There we go. 72 hundredths is 0 and 72 hundredths. Or you could say 0 and 72 hundredths is the same thing as 72 hundredths. It means out of 100 total parts, we have 72 of them. So I'm going to come back to this slide. I hope I leave myself time. I'm going to go to one more example. See, what does it look like when there is an actual number bigger than 0? Let's just do the number 4. Let's say I have 4. Decimal point means and 4 and 37 hundredths. So let's write that out and see what that looks like. Start with the whole numbers. So I have 4 decimal point and 37 hundredths. Make that larger so we can see it. Okay, again, there's the key word, right? Using our place values. Hundredths. So that hundredths means it's going to be, the denominator is going to be 100. So what do I have? I have a whole number. So let's write down the whole number. I have 4 and 37 hundredths, or 37 out of 100. It's the same thing as 4 and 37 hundredths. Or you could say 4 and 37 hundredths is the same thing as 4 and 37 hundredths. So it's important. I think the more that we actually read or call out the words that make up the place values, it gets easier to go from fraction to decimal or decimal to fraction. And you notice when you're dealing with tenths and hundredths and thousands, those become your denominator. If you're dealing with hundredths, your denominator is 100. If you're dealing with tenths, let me go to this one. If you're dealing with tenths, your denominator is tenths. Now the last thing that I'm going to show you, oftentimes people associate decimals with money. So for example, in this example, 0 and 4 tenths, that's, think about the coin that represents 10. Those are dimes. So you have 4 dimes here. That means we have $0 and 4 dimes, which is 40 cents, which is also the same thing as $0 and, or you could say 40 hundredths. That means you have 40 cents out of 100. I better hurry it up here. So this one right here is the 0 and 72 hundredths. That's $0 and 72 cents, right? $0 and 72 cents. Pretty simple, right? 72 cents. That means we have 72 cents out of a dollar. And remember, the dollar represents one whole because that's one whole dollar. The same way the ones column represents one whole. And that's another commonality that fractions and decimals have. You're relating them to the benchmark of a whole unit. Now for this last one, we have 4